Hi travelers, if you are interested in diplomacy, interested in becoming a diplomat, this video is for you. I had no other than the privilege of interviewing Miss Sheryl Pinckney-Mass. She is a retired Foreign Service officer with 25 years of experience, and travelers, she has lived everywhere, including China, Peru, Jordan, the Netherlands, just to name a few countries. In this interview that I have with Miss Pinckney-Mass, we go over a ton, including what is the commercial service, her experiences, and any advice that she has for you. Travelers, this is an interview you do not want to miss. Stick to the end because there are gems everywhere. But before we begin the interview, and before I bring on Miss Sheryl Pinckney-Mass, be sure to hit that subscribe button and hit the like button for more content like this. This lets me know that you want to see this type of information. All right, travelers, let's begin today's video.
Hi, my name is Sheryl Pinckney-Mass, and you're watching Composure Under Fire.
What is the commercial service?
The commercial service is a unit of the, part of the U.S. Department of Commerce, International Trade Administration. It was created in 1980 and for the sole purpose of helping small and medium-sized businesses export their products overseas to international markets, and working with, say, larger companies for advocacy.
What is your story?
What is my story? My story is, you have to go back, way back. And when I say way back, when I was 14. Mm-hmm. And when I was 14, I was in the Girl Scouts and we did a trip to Europe. And I remember that when we were in Switzerland, the US ambassador to the UN actually hosted us for coffee and, well, juice. And I remember him talking about what his job was and, you know, the life of a Foreign Service officer. And it was funny because I remembered at that moment going, I want that job. Mm-hmm. And that's when it started. So, you know, you fast forward a few years and I was in high school. There was no State Department because I'm from Charleston, South Carolina. And so I actually started working for a member of Congress as an intern in his office while I was in high school. And when he was up for re-election, there was a retired State Department officer who worked on his campaign. And that's when I really probably got more of an education, because my whole thing was, I'm going to be an ambassador. I want to travel. And he's like, well, slow your roll. You got to start off a little earlier than that. And so I moved to Washington. I went to college, then moved to Washington, worked on the Hill. So kind of forgot about Foreign Service for a while. And then when I left the Hill, I do believe in fate and I believe in God. So I started working at a company, American Textile Manufacturers Association. And the girl who sat down the hall from me, her parents were both Foreign Service officers with State Department. So she was a child of Foreign Service officers. And so at that moment, I was like, well, I always wanted to be in the Foreign Service. And so she says, well, let me get my mom to talk to you. And so I actually applied to State Department. And the first time I applied to State Department was 1991. And then the Gulf War, the war broke out, Desert Storm broke out. And so I was on the rank order register, and they closed the registry. They were not taking any officers or anyone off the registry. And then I applied again and I got on the registry. And so I didn't score that well. And actually the second time I applied to State Department, I actually applied as a specialist and to come in. And so, but I was still on the registry, on the rank order register. And I just remembered a good friend of mine told me, she said, I think there are other government agencies that have foreign services. And I had never heard of it, didn't know it. So I promise you, this is what I did. I was 23 or 24 at the time. And this is when, long before cell phones and having personal computers at home, I literally pulled out the phone book, the old phone book that in DC, because I was living in Washington at the time, they had a section that was blue, and that was all the government agencies. And I took off a day from work and I literally called every government agency in that book asking about foreign service. And so I got to agriculture, I got to commerce. There used to be an agency called USIS. There was USAID. And then there were other agencies like, DEA, who you have the international part, but they weren't foreign service. You had to already be an agent or whatever. So I literally did that for a whole day. And then after that, I applied to everybody. And I was, and I think at that time I was ready for a big change. I'd been in Washington for a while. I was ready for a change. My dream had always been to be overseas. And so I just, yes, I when I look back and I tell people, I said, I'm amazed because I ended up at Commerce and I really thought I was going to be at State because for years, that's the only one I knew, right? State Department. But I truly do believe in God because he put me in Commerce and I truly loved my work. I loved what I did. I think my personality, being an extrovert, actually suited me better for commercial work than if I had been, a political officer or someone else.
How long were you a commercial service officer? And where did you serve in the service?
So I served in the service. My very first posting was Beijing, China. And then I went to Johannesburg, South Africa. And the beauty of it is, and this is foreign service, and this is why it's such a great and amazing career. When I was in China, it was really, that was so far from my reality. I had been overseas before, but it was always like the Bahamas, Europe. When I got to China, I was like, you're not in Kansas anymore. But it was the most phenomenal time. There was a lot of things going on in China. A lot of things were still old China. There were very few cars on the road. Everybody rode a bicycle. I mean, it was just, it really was an amazing time. And to be young, I was 28 at the time. So to be young in Beijing, China was just a phenomenal time. And just to learn all that was there. And then we went to South Africa. South Africa was probably the country that had the most profound effect on me. My daughter was born there. And I got to meet Nelson Mandela.
Oh, wow.
Wow. So there's some really, Secretary of Commerce, Ron Brown came through, Bill Daley came through. I met President Clinton when he had inaugurated the commercial center in Johannesburg. So yeah, I had a really great time. So it was really just a phenomenal place. And I meant to say, I was in China, I got married in China. So even though my husband and I had known each other before I went over, he came over to visit and decided he wasn't going back, even though we were already engaged to be married the following year. We decided to get married. So we actually have the double happiness marriage certificates from the Chinese government. So, yeah. So after South Africa, we went to Monterrey, Mexico. And after Monterrey, Mexico, I did 2 years at the Export Assistance Center. State Department, you tend to have offices in Washington, and I think you do have a few around the US. Well, Commerce has almost an office in almost every state. So I went to the Export Assistance Center for 2 years. After that, I went to the Netherlands. And that was also a great time because my husband is originally from Netherlands. So we were actually able to carry our daughter to spend time with family. So to be a diplomat in my husband's country, we did all kinds of things there. It was a really great time. They had the jazz festival there that we always went to, just really nice. After the Netherlands, we went to Amman, Jordan. So I served in the Middle East. And that was also a wonderful post, loved it. And, floating on the Dead Sea, just an amazing country. It allowed me to travel around, went to Egypt, went to all the surrounding countries. And just, you got to understand that people are people wherever you go, right? And, sometimes we talk about people in a certain way, but you know what? At the end of the day, everybody wants to be happy. They want their children to be fine, be educated. They want to be safe. And that's it. And that's what you learn as you go from country to country and region to region. People are really who they are. And so after Mount Jordan, my last international tour was in Lima, Peru. And we were there. And in each of these countries, I either served 3 years or 4 years.
Is that typical for the length? For commerce, is it usually 3 or 4 years?
That is correct.
Oh, wow. That's different from state, because for state, it's usually we'll enter them 2 years and then 3 years for like mid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they assume that it usually takes you, your first year is actually just getting to know the business community, right? So our job is to help, as I said, help U.S. small and medium-sized companies, export their products to these international markets. But as you go in as an officer, you have to build your network within there, because the last officer who left, he built his network, and yes, that network gets turned over to you. But you also, it's a personality thing. Sometimes people that he had never met or she had never met, you met, right? And you click. And it's the same way for them. And so it takes a while for you to build that network, for them to trust you, for them to believe in you, and often for you to be, I think, effective in the business community. So as I said, 3 to 4 years for us.
Did you ever think you would become a diplomat?
Yes. And it goes back to that question when I was 14. I didn't know how I would get there, but I knew I wanted to do something like that. And because I was lucky enough at a very early age to be exposed to it, I knew it existed. I think, up until I got to Washington and really was there and got to meet people who are in the service, I didn't, and when I'm sitting in South Carolina, in the early 80s, in, late 70s, 79 or early 80s, I didn't know how does this little Black girl who's here in Charleston get to be in the Foreign Service? I didn't know how to get there. It was almost like, I want to be an astronaut. It's almost that kind of mentality. It's like, I want to be an astronaut, but you have no idea how you're going to be an astronaut. That's how I felt about, I think at 14, when I first started, when I heard about it and I wanted it, it's like that. But as the journey continued, what I realized is it could be done. And I was amazed at how many African Americans weren't in there. For commerce, I was actually, as far as I know, I was the first Black female in our Foreign Service.
Wow.
Yeah, in 1993. Yeah.
This is an honor. That's such an honor. I know we talked about it briefly, but how does someone become one?
They really have to take an assessment. They, when I was an assessor, one of the things that they used to say, they look for people with a minimum of 2 years of some kind of international business experience, right? And then you take the assessment, you sign up, you go, they send information out, but you also can go on usajobs.com. It talks about what the job is, what's required. It's also, you've got to be a US citizen, age, they have all this information that's there. And what I tell people who've gone into service, especially since I've been through it and I was an assessor, is think broadly. They say 2 years of international business experience, but somebody may go, well, I don't have that. But what else did you do? Were you in Peace Corps, and did you, for your role in Peace Corps, you helped, this village create something? Or if you worked for, you worked on the missionary board at your church, and every year y'all went to Africa and you did certain things. It was like, stop, because when I remember when I was going for, I had this like, but they're asking for this and I don't have this. And it was a Foreign Service officer who told me, think broadly, right? Look at all of your experience, and does your experience answer the questions?
Is there a certain type of education requirement for the Commerce Service?
I don't think so. I mean, you do need your bachelor's, but and I'm not even, I know they want you to have your bachelor's. I don't know if it's required or a must, Back in the day, it was a certain amount of, experience versus having the college degree, which is how a lot of government jobs are written. So I can't say that for sure, but I would say that they're really looking for people with bachelor's degrees or more. They're looking for people who have that international business experience, that probably you worked in a corporation, you worked for a business development, like there's an export assistance center here in Dallas. That's where I worked at some point. There's state offices that also do international. So they're looking for people who are on the professional level, who have experience doing international work. But just like in State Department, you have people who were attorneys. You have people who are other things. So there's no crafted, you have to do this. I think having any international experience, that you bring that to the table, it's very key and important for commerce. Maybe even a little bit more than State Department, right? Because with State Department, most officers start out as visa officers, right? Whereas with commerce, you go in automatically working with the business community. So they're looking for someone who is comfortable working with the business community and also, understand some business, right?
What kind of training do you need? What is the training like?
Well, they train you. Just like, wow, it's different because my coming in was at a different time, right? Because now commerce has this, they have this process that everybody goes through. Whereas before it wasn't as solidified. It was a process, but it wasn't like how it is today. So I would probably tell you, when I've talked to some young officers that are going in, it is a definite process and they are more stringent about certain things, but I think a lot of it, they're going to train you.
Do you know if the training's at FSI or is it at a different place?
No, it's at FSI. So like when I went in, I did Chinese at FSI for a short period of time. I know that sometimes it depends on the language. If you're doing like a romance language or something like that, you're usually at FSI. But there was also another language school that was in Rosalind that people could take. But usually those are officers that are on their second or third tour. First tour, they always want you to go to FSI because you need to get that language requirement in order to get your tenure. So they want you to go through FSI, but then there were other schools that you could go to once you've done that. And so even now that I'm out of the service, I hear that that's changed a little bit too. So I can't speak directly to that of how they're doing it now.
But it sounds like it's similar to state in the sense that like you go to FSI, you have the languages.
Right. You do your country briefings, right? Remember? So you're there for 6 months of training. You do language, you do, your country briefing. You go out, you have meetings with different people. For us, you might go and have meetings with the different chambers. There's a whole program that they set up for you based on coming in to the service. Loved it, had a great time. Even when things got difficult, loved it.
In what ways is the commercial service similar and different to the State Department?
Well, when we're overseas, we all fall under the auspices of the ambassador, right? And we probably work the closest with the econ office, right? Because the econ office, they work with the business community just like we work with the business community. Their job more are on the lines of, watching the macro situation, economic situation in a country. What are the trends that are happening in that country? What's impacting that country? And how that economic situation could impact U.S. policy and U.S. companies. Our job, which is more along the lines of, we're helping you do business. Mom and pop comes from, North Dakota, they, built a widget, for the wastewater treatment industry, and they want to sell it, I don't know, in Africa, because they literally read it somewhere, heard it somewhere, and they come to us while we're in country, and we go, okay, let's look at your widget. We kind of review them. We send them to the Export Assistance Center, which kind of vets them to make sure that they're ready, right? And then once they're ready, they're turned over kind of to the offices, our international offices. And what we do is then we go, okay, how do we help you get into this market? We help you find agents, distributors, or joint venture partners. And so that's when I'm overseas, I'm building relationships with those people. So I can say, hey, I have a company that's coming from North Dakota that makes widgets for the wastewater treatment, whatever. We'd like to set up appointments on this side and then bring those people together.
What is the average day like? Is there an average day?
I would say there really is no average day. I mean, you go into the office, you go into the embassy. I was head of section in 3 different countries, which was really awesome. And you have great teams of local professionals that work with you. I could get called upstairs to talk to the ambassador. I can get called to talk to business people. I can have the Secretary of Commerce come through with a business delegation that wants to meet, the Minister of Trade in this country and companies, local companies. And I think that's why I loved it so much. It's like every day could be something really different. I mean, we had some stuff that we had to do. Yes, we answered emails from US companies making inquiries into the market. We watched trends also of what was happening in the country in certain industry sectors. We wrote industry market research for the US companies. So there was so many things that we did, but it was never a dull moment, right? It was really, truly never a dull moment.
So you were normally on the go?
Normally on the go, and did a lot of late hours. I find that in the commercial service, maybe a little bit more than all of the State Department does some of it. I won't say, because I know the econ officer tends to do this as well, but I mean, we were always at like receptions and events. And so, I mean, you could leave home at 7 a.m. and come home at 11 o'clock at night, easily. And I used to work 12-hour days, probably regularly.
What were some of the responsibilities that you had throughout the day?
I'll start with, like I said, the last 3 countries, I was head of section. So when when I was in the Netherlands, I had a team of 10. And then when I was in, what was after that? Amman, Jordan, I had a smaller team. I had a team of 3. And then when I was in Peru, I had a team of 6. But part of it, your job as SEO is to run that office. And you've got these professionals there that are locals who understand the market. Most of your LES staff, locally engaged staff, the professionals, they know the industry. A lot of them came from industry. So your job is to make their job easy. One of the things, you learn in leadership is your job is to serve. And who you're serving is your employees. My job is to make their job easy and able and for them to be able to do it, right? And so that was, you come in, you make sure that they have their resources that they need to do their job. Because at the end of the day, I help them do their job, and then they do what they need to do for American mom and pop, the US taxpayers, right? So I think that was probably, like I said, serving. I would also, as head of section, I sat on the embassy country team. I was also—
What is the embassy country team?
The embassy country team is basically all heads of section. We're considered like advisors to the ambassador. The ambassador is the president's representative in country, right? And so just like how a president has advisors, his chief of staff and all this other stuff at the White House, an ambassador has her advisors, and her advisors are all the heads of section. So if something's going on in regards to, say, law enforcement or a problem, she contacts the head of DEA who's, in her office. If she's talking to somebody about business, maybe one of our Fortune 500 companies, like, look, I'm trying to get this government tender, and they seem to be, getting ready to give it to one of our competitors and whatever. We need some help and advocacy. The ambassador will call the commercial officer in, and probably the econ counselor in, to ask for help. Who's our contact? Who can we talk to? Because our job at the end of the day is get that business for American companies.
Did anything surprise you in your career?
I wouldn't say surprised. I think, that's no surprises. I think the thing that probably was like one of the best things that came out of there is you're away from family, when you're living overseas. And so what happens is you become family with a lot of the people you're serving with. There are some people that I haven't seen them in 10 years, but if I called them up today and said, hey, I need to come and stay at your house, they'll be like, okay, come on over. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? It really is like family. There are people that, there are things I shared with people in certain countries that I never got to share with my real family. And so therefore, that I think is those friendships, those connections, I think are very strong.
What was your greatest lesson that you've learned by being a commercial service officer?
I think the greatest lesson I learned is that, because we do help U.S. companies. I wanted to do the best for U.S. companies. I wanted us to win. I'm very competitive by nature. So, I'm like, what are the Brits doing? What are the French doing? I wanted, and so I think for me, what I learned is that what the needs are of the customer, which is the small and medium-sized companies. Sometimes because we're in government, we don't know how they view money, right? Because the Department of Commerce has products and services that we actually sell to U.S. companies. We actually ourselves, as a commercial service, act almost as a business in itself, right? But we're government. So we don't make a profit per se, but we do cost recovery. And so I think what I learned along the way was, if I go, well, we have this gold key service, or we have this service and it costs, $1,000, and a company says they don't want to spend it. My first thought was like, oh, they don't understand the benefits of it. Oh, whatever. They just don't get it. They're too small. And I think after doing it for many years, I realized that companies think differently. They're looking at their ROI, their return on investment, and how long that investment's going to be. Mm-hmm. And so, and they're looking at us, even as the commercial service, do they even believe we can get them to where they're going? It doesn't matter if it's $1,000. It's that money, every penny of that $1,000 have to give them a return on their investment. Mm-hmm. And I think once I started thinking in that way, I think my conversation with companies actually started changing as well. And even when we're trying to bring them and get them to use our services, how I spoke to the companies.
Mm. What was your greatest challenge?
There are challenges everywhere, right? I mean, challenge, going through getting pregnant when you're overseas, getting married when you're overseas, raising a family overseas. We only came back to the US when my daughter was 14. So we spent all of our time overseas with our, there's always never that. There's the professional challenges, but there's also the family challenges. And the truth of the matter is the family challenges impact the professional challenges. Because if you think about it, working at an embassy overseas, everything in your life is, controlled under this umbrella, right? Your job. If your spouse gets a job, maybe he's at the embassy, maybe he's not. But the only reason why he gets a work permit is because your job at the embassy. Your children go to private schools, but it's still through your job. So everything is under that umbrella. And you can't uncouple it, right? So if you're working at a company in the US, you just go to work every day and come back. They have no impact on your housing. They have no impact on your school. They have no impact on your husband's job, And so if for whatever reason, and we've seen officers who leave a post for whatever reason, be it good or bad, their whole family has to uncouple their lives and move.
Mm.
And that is a huge challenge in keeping a family happy in the service while you're doing that. I have an amazing husband. My husband and I got married in my very first tour. We had already been engaged before I got in. He is an amazing man because he learned very early on how to create his own environment within that embassy to go out and get jobs on the outside market, to market himself. His job when we got in country was to look for a job. And I tell people all the time, when we first get in country, literally within the first 2 weeks, he's got a home office. He's got internet, he's got laptop, he's got computers, and he's already hitting, he's, got business cards printed. He's hitting out, he's prepared to go look for a job.
That's good. That's good. Having a supportive partner is like key.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And one of the things I tell, young women when I came in the service, right? A lot of people don't realize that the generation before me of women in the foreign service, you were not allowed to be married. And if you got married, you had to get out of the service. So I met kind of those women who were kind of like at the end of their careers, like they were like the secretary for the ambassador, but they were like 60 and they were getting ready to retire. But a lot of them never got married, never had children, because if they did, they would have to get out of the service. Now for us, that's unheard of. It's like, oh my gosh, really? But yes, that's how it was. And so when I came in, having a male spouse, very few women had male spouses. And so there wasn't a lot of support for male spouses. I think in our very first tour, there may have been 4 out of the whole post of male spouses, trailing spouses, it changed over time. So, because by the time I think I hit my last post, you had male trailing spouses, you had, now we had computers and laptop. People were actually, working in Peru, but they were working for a company in the US. They were, I guess, teleworking or however we call it. But so the world had changed, right? And how things were done.
Yes. How did this career affect your family life?
I think it's been tough. Well, for my immediate family, my husband and my children, it was an amazing time for us. I think if there was any negative on family, is the extended family, because you're not around for certain things. Like at one point when I was in Peru, I get the phone call from my mother, my brother died, right? And so, all of a sudden I realized I hadn't seen my brother in a year, and now he's gone, right? So that's some of the negative impact that can happen with the life that we lead, right? So what it taught me was I try never to have to leave on a sour note with family. I learned that when I'm with my parents, because my parents are a lot older now. My father's 95, my mom's 88. But when I was in South Africa, my father had been put in the hospital, and I only knew about it. They only told me after he got out of the hospital. So I realized that a lot of times I'm not going to know what's going on until it's too late. And so that's something I had to make peace with. And so like I said, when I'm with my parents, when I would come home on R&R, I spend enough time with them that I feel good. And I make sure there's lots of hugs, kisses when I go. And so that if I got the word that one of them passed away while I was gone, my last interaction with them was very positive.
What was your biggest accomplishment?
I think my biggest accomplishment was actually whenever I got promoted, which I always loved, because most people don't realize we're very similar to the military. And so therefore promotions aren't automatic. You compete against your colleagues all around the world who are your same grade level, right? So like in the military, you have, your captains, your majors, your colonels, your lieutenant colonels. Well, we have our grade levels, right? We have our FS, 5? I think we start off at 6. So 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And then you're a counselor, but you're competing against all the people in your class. And you may have somebody who's, taking bullets in, Abuja or something, and you're sitting in Europe and you're going, well, I did this and I thought it was a phenomenal job. And they're like, well, they did that while ducking bullets and running from lions. You know what I mean? And so, so you're trying to get promoted. And so it's really, that in itself is a challenge. And I think a lot of people don't realize, and there's a board that gets together and they read everybody's evaluation within that class. And then they rank you accordingly, and they'll go, okay, these people are getting promoted and these people are not. You get to keep your job. Do better next time. You know what I mean? And so, and it's tough. And I think what I realize is you can, in the Foreign Service, you can decide what kind of career you want to have. I know some people who spent their whole career just hanging out in Europe, nice posts, places where you go, no hardship tours, everybody has to do one, but even their hardship tour was hardship light. But they just like that lifestyle, right? And you get your colas and all that other stuff, but they didn't get promoted as often. They didn't get as many opportunities and other things. And then you have the people who did nothing but hardship tours. They were getting all that extra money, that extra whatever, the extra benefits. They wanted to get promoted. And I mean, literally they would go from, one difficult country where, you're boiling water and you're hoping that you're not getting malaria or any other disease, to the next country, the same thing. And my thing is, somebody told me a long time ago, decide what kind of career you want. You can have a great career for 20, 30 years, living in these wonderful places with a wonderful life and going to concerts and festivals and whatever around the world. Or you can I want to get promoted every other year. So I'm going to take a bullet. I'm going to the hardest countries I can find, and that's what some people do.
Not a bullet though.
Yeah.
What is it like being a woman of color in the service?
I think it's almost like being a woman of color in a lot of places. You still have to work twice as hard to get. I think the only difference is, now that I'm in private sector, is I realize there are a lot of safety nets in government, EEOCs, things that you can do when you feel like you've been discriminated against or treated unfairly. In private sector, it's harder to do. And it's a lot tougher. And I used to always think that, private sector must be way more advanced than government and all this stuff. Actually, they're not. So, and I think, but I never had any real problems in the service as a woman of color. It's interesting because depending on your country, like I remember when I served in Africa, I remember people just assuming you were African. And so, sometimes the Africans themselves preferred dealing with our white colleagues versus us because they saw it in a, in a different way, like, oh, well, I want to be with them because that's more prestigious versus being with you. And like I said, a lot of this is, back in the day, a lot of this is totally changed. So, but that's how it was for me. But I think that being in the service was, as a woman of color, I never felt discriminated against in my work. And sometimes I felt that you did, the way things were done, like, oh, well, women, of course, are going to be in charge of, we're putting on, the Christmas party. Of course, they're in charge of, all of that stuff. And it's like, well, why? Is it because I'm a girl? Or, well, he's sometimes I think the guys got a pass more than the women did. It was a little tougher. But I think actually it was just women versus guys more than the black and white thing.
What is your travel schedule like as a commercial service officer, and are there any travel perks?
Oh, I loved Foreign Service for that reason. Yes, there are lots of travel perks. You get your R&R and your home leave.
What is that?
But just think, huh?
What is
rest and recuperation. So you get your rest and recuperation 3-year tour. You either get 2 R&Rs or you get 1 home leave. And the R&Rs are, I think you can take up, well, actually you can take up to a month off. So to tell you the truth, when everybody's been talking about 2 weeks vacation in the private sector for 100 years, Foreign Service has been giving 1 month vacations for a long time. And so you can take a month off and go travel. And for R&R, you don't have to go back to the US. You're given a certain budget. And you, because I remember one time, instead of coming back to the US, we decided to go to Europe and go to Spain and go other places. Part of it is just to get you out of that country, if it's a hardship country, just to be able to rest and recuperate. You can go to the Bahamas for a month if you want to, you know, as long as you just stick within the budget. Home leave is also getting, I think you can, it's a minimum of a month, so it's a mandatory month. And then you can go up to, I think up to 2 months. And that they specifically want you to come back to the US. And that's what, yeah.
Why do they want officers to come back to the US?
I think part of it is, there's many reasons. One of it is so that we do stay connected to our home country. They also have a limit on how long you can stay in a country. You can't stay more than 5 years in a country. And part of that is, and I've seen it, where officers who say maybe they studied in a country and then they came back as a foreign service officer. Your job is to be there, you know, to help US interests, not to get so enmeshed in the local politics and whatever that you think your loyalties are divided. And that's part of the reason why there's a limit on how long we can stay. And home leave is you come back every once in a while. And that is for you to come in and get reacclimated to your own country. And I can't tell you that sometimes it's been interesting, especially in the early days when I was in, you'd come back and things changed. I remember, like, I went away and then I came back and all of a sudden all the phone booths were gone and you needed phone cards. And it's like, where do you get a phone card? Where are the phone booths? You know, I mean, it's like, well, I was just here a year ago. I saw all the changes that we were going through as a government overseas. So you see some of these things and now you laugh at them, but it's true.
Yeah, I get that every time I go back home. I'm like, wow, it's so different. What makes a great diplomat? What attributes make a great diplomat?
A person who can listen, a person who has empathy, a person who have really an interest in people. But as a diplomat, you're there at the behest of your own country. So remembering who you are and doing the best for your own country.
What is the average salary like for a commercial service officer?
Well, it's the same as State Department, right? You have this, it's based on your grade and it's published actually. Most people don't know that, but you can actually Google, you know, the salary for a Foreign Service officer or a State Department officer. And if you know somebody's, you know, grade and step, you can figure out their salary. Their salaries tend to be, I think, very competitive. I think the benefits that we get offset. I mean, you know, like when I retired, they said, oh, you're comparable to the rank of a lieutenant colonel. And I'm like, okay, that's good. And then they said, okay, what were my benefits? My child got to go to some of the best schools in the world. She got to meet kids and hang out with kids from phenomenal families, top families in countries, learn things that she never would have. And I remember when I first got into service, I wasn't married, nor did I have children. So I was like, okay, I'm looking at the benefits. I'm like, okay, those don't apply. Those don't apply. Those apply. So I'm like, what benefits do I get here? But as you stayed in longer, you were able to, you know, those benefits came in. And like I said, when my husband, when I got married, all the things, they helped us facilitate our, you know, get our marriage set up when we were in China. I mean, there's so many benefits, but there's benefits for the job because you're doing something and what you're doing really has an impact on people's lives, be it locally or in the US. What you're doing actually does become policy I know that things that I wrote and I sent back to headquarters actually made it into, the secretary's talking points, be it into Congress or whoever he's talking to. So you actually see that whatever you do matters. And that is the beauty of, the benefit. I think it makes you feel like you have a purpose, a real purpose. And I think that's why I love the job so much. And like I said, the benefits, once I started having children, man, amazing. And what it gave to my husband, what it gave to my daughter, and I had a son. My son he had slight learning disabilities, and so when he was very young, and so they got the best, kind of specialist to help him out. So I mean, I don't know if I would have been able to afford that if I was still living in the US at that time, you know what I mean, depending on what my job would have been. But all of a sudden, the US government paid for it because of my rank and, me being a Foreign Service officer.
That's amazing. That's amazing. What would you say to someone who wants to follow in your footsteps?
I would say, make sure you want this life. It's not an easy life, but it's a rewarding life. It is hard when you're away from family, right? When I was in China, back in the day, China didn't celebrate Christmas. So here you was Christmas Day in China. It's a work day for them. You're sitting around like, okay, there's no Christmas, just Christmas at the embassy. But it was still, it always felt a little weird, right? Because it's like you're trying to create something when you didn't have it that the wider community does not celebrate. But like I said, it's a tough life, but it's a rewarding life. And knowing yourself and knowing that if you're a person that, I'm a homebody, I'm always with my parents, or I'm always with my family, it's going to be really hard to have this life. It's really going to be challenging. And you get people who get over there and get homesick and get out of the service. And it's like, wow, that was an amazing career that you just walked away from. But it was something that, and maybe they're like, well, okay, I did it for 2 years, I was happy. But to really have the full breadth of the career for like 20, 25, 30 years, that's amazing. And so, but you have to be willing to understand that you're not going to always be around for your extended family. And so one of the things I also tell people, and it's one of my husband and I were talking about this today when I was looking at your questions, what I would offer to young women who want to go in the Foreign Service now is if you want to get married, you can get married. Understand that Foreign Service has a high divorce rate. And part of it is, if you have a good marriage, it can become better. If you have a bad marriage, it can become worse. And part of it is there is so much pressure in the life that we lead, right? In Foreign Service. And you probably realize it too. You have the job pressures, you have living in that country pressure. You've got all this pressure. Now you have a spouse that you're already having problems with. And I always tell women, look for men who are, especially if they're women who are, they're getting married, make sure that their spouse knows how to create a life for themselves. Because, in certain cultures, here you are, you're the one who's employed at the embassy. And it happened to my husband a couple of times when he first got there, and they're like, oh, well, you must be the diplomat because you're the man. And it's like, well, no, she is. And then they look at you and they're like, okay, well, then what do you do? And, because you are your business cards in certain cultures, and your spouse doesn't have one. So all of a sudden, the men in that country look down on your spouse. That's a hard thing for men and American men to live with. So another thing that I learned, there was a group of 4 of us that were women whose husband trailed. We stuck together. Why? Because sometimes we get it. You come home, the husband's been there, maybe he's working, maybe he hasn't been able to find a job yet, he's frustrated, and you've just come from a hard day at work. You've got to be empathetic and whatever. You may be going, why he's whining or he's whatever. You don't want to say that to a person who's given up their life to follow you. So what you need to do is go talk to your other female friends who have officers who have male trailing spouses and talk about it. Because sometimes I always just make my comment was always talk you off the roof. Because sometimes you'd get mad like, oh my God, why can't he do this? Why can't, but think about it. How many men will give up their careers, their life to follow a woman? That is an amazing man that you have that's even willing to try. Mm-hmm. And you've got to give him the props for it, because most men will not.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I give my fiance the props for it. Like, yeah, you're so right. What are some resources for somebody who's interested in joining the Foreign Commercial Service?
My thing is really going to USA Jobs. But if you want to learn more about what being a diplomat is like, if you really need to go to State Department, because that's where we really have all the information, right? About when you're a diplomat, what that means and whatever. So I would tell them to go on the State Department website, state.gov, and look at a lot of information. If you go to the Commercial Service website, you'll learn about what a commercial officer does, but it doesn't really go into all the information about family. It doesn't go into your benefit. You know what I mean? It doesn't go into as much detail as the State Department does in that regards. I would look at both, Department of Commerce, I would look at both of them. There is a Commercial Service website. Go look at that. It tells you what we do. It talks about how we help companies. It tells you what services we offer, what countries we're in, that kind of information. We have a country commercial guide that we write every year. Every post that we're in, we write one. We do it in collaboration with our State Department colleagues and other colleagues. And it talks about the country, how business is done there. Different things, one of the things you learn is yes is not always a yes and no is not always a no in business, depending on what country you're in. So just learning all those different things.
What are you currently doing?
When I transitioned, and I'll tell a quick story. In 2015, I think it was October. It was either October or November. There was an active shooter event in Paris at the Bataclan Theater, and about 138 people died. But at the same time of the Bataclan Theater, there were 2 terrorist attacks on 2 restaurants in an area of Paris that also killed people. And they tried to do a terrorist attack at the stadium where Germany was playing France that night. But I don't think they realized that the president was going to be there. So there was their president, the French president was going to be there. So they had extra security. But for whatever reason, I had just gotten back to the US after serving in Peru. And I was serving actually in Washington. And it just hit me because my husband was from the Netherlands. Because Paris is only 5 hours away, almost every time we went to the Netherlands, we always went to Paris. And I was like, wow, we've been in that section of town. And, and even though it had been years, it was like, all of a sudden you were thinking like, we could have been in that restaurant. We could have been at that place. It could have been us. And for some reason, I thought, well, when we're overseas, right? We're taught a lot of different things to do for security. I mean, we do our duck and cover drills, right? When I was in Peru, you had your walkie-talkies that you call the Marine Guards. You had all of this stuff that we're taught. We're taught how to be proactive in our security. And when I was watching this, there was a woman literally hanging out of a second floor window at the Bataclan Theater, right? While the terrorists were walking around. And I don't know, for whatever reason, it touched me in a way. And from that moment on, I knew I wanted to do something in security. And I took what we learned as diplomats on how to be safe, right? And I created a technology that kind of would help do that. And so Guardian Zone is a crowdsourced security solution that allows people in large public places to engage directly with security during an emergency. And when I say crowdsource intelligence, because sometimes people see things and they notice it, but they're like, it's not enough to call the police. It's not enough to do whatever. But if they had a way to be able to communicate what they see that makes them uneasy, that could actually mitigate a problem. And so Guardian Zone was created on that. And it's been a journey because, I had to learn, I knew nothing about tech in that regards, but I just got nominated and selected to be on the steering committee for women in security for the Security Industry Association. So we're going to probably do a press release on it once the official word comes out. But I was told about it while we were at the conference. People were congratulating me, and I'm like, what? And they go, you got selected. And I'm like, well, I haven't gotten the email. Where's the email? And they're like, oh, yeah, that's coming. Don't worry, you're in. So that's an honor. But part of the reason why I'm thrilled about it is because you start meeting some of the bigger companies and people in the industry. And now you're constantly in that room because people buy and do business with people they trust. And I'm no longer the government, I'm Cheryl, right? And so that was a transition too, to go from being the senior commercial officer and the commercial counselor and having a staff of 10 and a driver and all this other stuff to being a company of one. And everybody's like, I never heard of you. And no, thank you. It's been a journey, but I love it. It's really interesting. I'm like, it's a journey. It's a mental journey, because going from government, which we're about processes and things, to results for business, where it's all about ROI and return on the dollar and return on the investment, it is a different mindset. And it was that itself was a challenge, but it can be done, and I love it, and it's interesting. And I'm in a new industry. I'm in two new industries. I'm in tech and I'm in security. And so I've been in there since, really 2017, even though I was still working for commerce, but it's been a journey of learning. It's been mistakes. It's, because they have their own, ecosystem that you fall into. And I had to learn that. And what does that mean? And who are these people? Oh, it's not the ambassador who's the top guy. It's this, CEO of this major, Fortune 500 company. How do I get access to him? Well, when I was a commercial officer, I had access to all those people. Now as a startup CEO, I'm hoping to get in sniffing distance, right? So, but I do use a lot of the skills that I learned as a diplomat. So I'm very easy to talk to. I'm very outgoing. I can go in any room and just start talking to people about anything, so there's some definitely benefits from being a diplomat to doing this. It's nicely, at first I never mentioned I was a diplomat. And then at some point I had a conversation with somebody, and they're like, are you kidding me? And then people started coming up to me and going, well, thank you for your service. And I always think of people like the military, right? So I'm like, why are you thanking me for my service? But then after a while, I realized that also helped me, because all of a sudden people looked at me differently, because now I'm not just somebody who showed up, 5 years ago, talking about starting a company. I'm somebody with a history, and an impressive history.
All right, travelers, well, that concludes today's video. A big thank you to Miss Cheryl for spending time with us today and sharing her experiences about the commercial service. Travelers, if you enjoyed today's video, be sure to let me know in the comment section below, and be sure to hit that like button and smash the subscribe button for more content like this. And until next time, travelers, let's travel with our dreams together. See you later. Bye-bye.